to another episode of Hand Tool Rescue. Today is once again a glorious tool day. What we have here is a underwater pneumatic reciprocating saw. I found this locally here in Saskatoon, and that may or may not relate to how it was used. We have a lot of bridges here, and this saw was known to be used to cut bridge beams underwater when they were doing maintenance or construction. So may have been used at some point between 1947 and onwards. This is an earlier model. The later models that were made in the 60s are a little bit smaller. So it may be used here, but it will live once again, hopefully. The disassembly on this one is pretty straightforward. Luckily, almost all the parts are aluminum, so the amount of rust is very minimal, and anything kind of within that cylinder of the tool that is steel isn't really rusty at all due to the immense amount of oil that the air flowing through the oiler applies to this tool. So it's more of an external restoration. In this case, the external parts that are steel are rusty, and the blade is aggressively rusty. I don't know why they wouldn't just make, it all out of stainless steel if it was an underwater thing, but even stainless steel will rust over time, so maybe that's what happened here. As I'm disassembling this, I'm also trying to simultaneously figure out how this thing functions. It's incredibly interesting and neat. I haven't seen anything like this before. You all know I love the Danger saws, and this is no different in that case, but it's definitely different in how it's powered and how it functions. Right here I'm taking off the oiler. It's a Rucker Company oiler. So I'm going to give that to Keith Rucker after this, because he expressed immense interest in finding one of those and having it. So I will send that off to him and just get a different oiler if I ever run this for a massive amount of time. The end caps here that I'm unscrewing are difficult to get off only because there are rubber seals that also ride within the threading. And that's what kind of seals it off from the outside world and doesn't allow water to get in where air should be. So it's kind of difficult to get off, but I figure it out. The oil is still in there. It smells kind of funky, but it's still in there. So that's a good sign, always a good sign. And here's the incredibly, incredibly cool designed and intricate split piston reciprocating action rack and pinion thing. It's just nuts. It must have been fairly expensive to create.
Oh, you like that, do you? Like it when I do that? You want me to keep going? Talk metric to me.
So there's some really weird stuff in that cylinder. Just never look in there again. This part is what I would call the throttle, or at least the mechanism that allows the air to flow or not flow, which is obviously important, almost like a trigger. So I'm just trying to sort out how this contraption comes apart. I'm just literally wiggling and jiggling things. But this is very clean on the inside, this specific part. That might be more of just, I touch it lightly externally instead of internally, as they say. The rubber seals seem fine, which is fantastic for me. I guess soaking in the oil all those years. They're still rubbery, they're still springing, there's nothing hard, they're not deteriorating. It makes me very happy. I am wondering if I can actually run this off of my own home compressor. It's only 20 CFM, and I don't really know how much this one needs to run. So probably not, but taking it apart helps me kind of figure that out. Everything that's rusty into the evaporust. And while that's soaking, I'll try and take apart these split pistons. So there's a piece of like a mica resin hybrid that is holding these half piston rings in place. The rings themselves are also dovetailed or kind of like a French cleat system. So they can't actually pop out of the cylinder if they wanted to. And the springs keep that pressure against the sides of the aluminum cylinder to enable, I guess, a decent or better seal. Or maybe it's a kind of a locating positional thing. I'm not sure, but either way, it's incredibly neat. I've never seen anything like that before. At the end of both of the pistons are these hardened steel portions that were cast into, or I guess the aluminum was cast around these, and then these were hardened. And when I mean hardened, they were seriously hard, incredibly hard. Somewhere between 60 and 65 Rockwell, which is ridiculous. I'm surprised these haven't deteriorated and snapped at some point, but all they do is really push against a piece of plastic, so the wear over time is not immense. You could see that piece of plastic that they push against, and that kind of opens one side or the other side, and they just reciprocate back and forth. I'm going to take this apart to have a look. I don't know what's going on inside, but the second I open up, I immediately regret it, because there are a bunch of tiny springs that fly around in my face, and I absolutely hate that because, as you may know, I don't have the cleanest workshop in the entire universe, so if something springs in my face, it's possibly gone forever. So I'm just going to seal that back up. There's not one speck of rust because everything's aluminum, everything's still oiled, nothing's broken. Why mess with it? Have some restraint. Now these half rubber seal things with the springs attached go within that split piston. And I'm assuming when they fire back and forth, the spring kind of helps with that reciprocating action. Otherwise, I really have no idea how else it would function. The springs seem fine, which makes me happy. They're not broken in any sense of the word. If they were, those would be incredibly hard to source, so I'm glad to see that. Again, there's not much rust in here. I will clean these up and polish them a little bit and make everything run a little more smoothly. But nothing major needs to be done. Oh, what's that? I was also kind of hoping that the evaporust would help remove the stickers on the body of the tool, but it didn't seem to soften the glue at all for whatever reason. So we'll have to go to some other methods. Everything else turned out great though, which I'm happy to see. I was slightly worried that some parts would be a little bit of magnesium in them, but they're just all pure aluminum. Any magnesium within evaporust is not good at all. It will turn to powder. So the oiler has a little glass window here that I'm trying to knock out, and it's not that simple. I kind of have to go from the inside, and I had to have one of my screwdrivers that I'm working on custom ground is what I did to fit this slot. It's a weird kind of concave slot. So what can you do? Now I have this screwdriver for other applications. It actually fit perfectly otherwise, widthwise. I'm going to clean this cap up, replace the rubber seal for sure. It wasn't leaking, but it just doesn't. Why not? I have the power. Still some juice in there. Very juicy. Very delicious. And I believe what's in there is kind of the flow rate of the oil setting, and I'm not going to touch that at all. I'm just going to leave whatever a professional last touched it when this was last running. They can go crazy. Also, I broke that finally. Sandblasting removes the stickers, nice and easy. I'm going to sand this all smooth anyways. I will have to obviously recreate these, so that is something that shall be done by the end of the video. Now I'm trying to sand the cylinder. It originally had this brushed aluminum look, so I'm kind of trying to bring that back, but holding this in the lathe is incredibly tricky and dangerous. It's not supported on the end, so I'm just taking it nice and slow with that one. This one I can go a little faster. Both end caps get a kind of nice sand and a light polish, just to bring it all consistent brushed aluminum look. There are deeper hits and scratches in there that I'm just not going to be able to get out on any level, because it would make the cylinder way too thin and potentially weaken the tool. So that's something we're not after, so we have to just kind of compromise with leaving the little kind of dents. There are very few of them anyways. I will wire brush these and polish these up as well, just to match everything else. I noticed in the little gear here, there were chunks of aluminum kind of just gulled into the gears. I was going to file it away, and then I realized I can actually just pop these right off, which is fantastic. So this shouldn't mar up that other set of gearing any further, which makes me very happy. And I'm also just going to fill this inset red area once again with red paint very lightly, just to bring it back. It's not a lot of work to do, so you might as well. There's still some dirt left in there, but I'll clean it off later. Here are the dents created by those chunks of aluminum that were stuck in that gear. So I am going to flatten the sides of each and every one of the damaged teeth. Just try to get them as smooth as possible. We want this operating cleanly. I don't need an increased amount of danger in my face because things aren't as they should be. Once that's all done, the sandblasted to wire brush transformation is something I really like. It makes a really clean, nice surface that is consistent, and it makes me very happy. So I do like that. This is obviously a brass wheel. Steel wheel would totally scratch this up. Now, in with the springs, in with the maximum oil application at all times, and in with the half piston ring things. Very simple. Now that I know where things go, the reassembly process makes a little bit more sense. I still love the actual idea of this. I don't know why. There's so many different ways to make something reciprocate, and choosing this way is incredibly interesting. There is a patent specifically for this that I do link in the description if you want to have a look at that design. So this was made by Wright, and if you remember, I did a gas-powered reciprocating saw earlier in the channel's history, and that's made by the exact same company. And this specific saw, the pneumatic one, was the first ever saw that they produced and designed. So it's kind of interesting having that as part of my collection now, since the one that I restored that was gas-powered was much later along the line. That was like a 60s, not a 40s saw. Everything's going back in its place. I'm not going to touch the rubber at all. It's still sealing, judging by how hard it was to get off those aluminum end caps. It still seems to be fine, but the ultimate test will be the final test. If something explodes, then I failed tremendously. Now, like I said, maximum oil at all times. I believe it called for 20 weight oil. Here I have 30 weight. I don't think it's the end of the world. but there's very little information on this saw. I still don't actually know what CFM, what amount of air is required to run this. So it's going to be kind of a shot in the dark until I figure it out. Now, the casting so nicely indicates exactly where this gear should go between the two split pistons. So that makes things very easy for reassembly. If you got that wrong, I assume it would fire out the front or something like that, which you would not want, obviously. Squish the piston rings in with the entire assembly. I'm just so concerned about not having enough oil at start. You know, maybe it'll be really difficult to start that something breaks. So I'm just making sure that everything's massively lubricated. That bolt is back on. That indicates that gear. It locks it in place in a correct position forever. And that's essentially all that bolt does. The handle's looking fantastic after the sandblast and wire wheel, and I did give the bolt, that bolt there, a nice polish, and the handle a new fresh coat of paint after sandblasting. So that's looking great as well. Now this part slides in between the two pistons along steel rails within the cylinder to make sure that those split pistons stay split and do not cross paths in any way. That would obviously be not a good idea. Getting this back on was incredibly difficult. I soaked my vice grips in hot glue and was using a bunch of rags and towels to make sure I don't mar up this aluminum. And that seemed to be fine and hold tight, which makes me happy. I thought about using thread sealer on those threads, but I figured the actual really thick rubber seals would be best. And if it did start leaking out there, then I could go back and just use some thread tape. But I'm not sure how effective that would be anyways. The oiler's looking nice and shiny. I'll fill it up with that 30 weight oil and then just screw the cap on. It should be totally fine. That's the new rubber seal. And I'm not massively concerned that this functions perfectly anyways, as long as it is applying oil and it's not too little amount of oil, then I'm happy with it. If it's too much oil, I'm not massively concerned. This won't be running for a very long time. It'll be running in short bursts for testing, I'm assuming, unless someone really needs this once again for industrial bridge construction. Now we move on to the blade. So the blade is its own separate interesting design. It's two blades like a turkey carver electric knife situation. They fit together with slots and rails that are built in and riveted on each side of the blade. And they'd have these markings of BRS and C6204. I don't know what that means. And then there's 48 in what might be blue dicum at the end of each saw blade. And I really don't know what these mean. The 48 doesn't match the number of teeth. I thought maybe that was it. I honestly don't know what any of that means. So I'm just going to take off a layer of the black oxide that's formed after the evaporust just to see what we got underneath. I don't know how bad the pitting is, and this will expose that and let me know what I'm dealing with and how to proceed further. So it's looking like the pits are too deep to completely remove. I would sand through the rivets and the rails would come apart, and essentially this entire piece needs to be remade. But the pitting is kind of cool in this aspect. It's very neat. look that I'm not entirely opposed to at this stage, which might be odd, but I think it looks kind of cool. So I'm just going to leave it in this case. I'm going to try and source blades. They do exist. It might take a few years to find them, but I'll probably find them. You can see I sharpened each and every teeth here, so it should be able to cut exquisitely with not a massive amount of effort, I'm hoping. The blades stay together and are locked into the pistons with this dovetail setup, which is very nice. That should keep them nice and secure with, you know, violent amount of air punishing through this tool. Here's the new label. So I had to really research and find an insane amount of photos to piece together the correct wording that was original to this. No one photo had a beautiful shot of this. This is probably the only complete decal for this tool ever created. So I really need to make sure that it is correct. The same with this one. This is obviously much easier to figure out the wording since there's only 4 instead of hundreds. But this looks great as well. The vinyl sticker is fantastic and very original. So, that was my test run. And it's not supposed to fire the piston out the front and kill people. So I actually broke apart, which was not ideal. But it sounds amazing now that I fixed it. Get to the chopper! The other issue is I got a 70 CFM compressor, which I thought would be more than enough for this. Not enough. Not enough. Maybe it needed to be 120, 140 maybe. It just slows down and won't eat through the wood at all. Also, the blade has the teeth have no set. They're not curved outwards. So this might have been used as an ice saw, which would kind of make sense from where I am. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm thinking and leaning towards that. Either way, thank you once again for joining me, and I'll see you all in a wonderful next video. Later.